My name is Sarah Moulton. I'm an urban planner with NCPC's Physical Planning Division, and I'm here today to update the Commission on a collaborative initiative to articulate a vision and a role for Pennsylvania Avenue in our 21st century capital. So Pennsylvania Avenue is one of the most historic thoroughfares in the world. It's guided by the L'Enfant-Macmillan plans, as you're well aware of, and it's served many roles over time, from a rural thoroughfare to a bustling entertainment district, and really everything in between. It's been the backdrop to our nation's celebrations and our sorrows. And it's also seen a significant amount of revitalization over the years. 40 years ago, the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation, or PADC, was formed by Congress to direct millions of dollars in public and private reinvestment back into the street. After decades of neglect, a steady flow of residents moving to the suburbs, and a 9-to-5 use dominating the entire south side of the avenue, this place was in really bad shape. Buildings were literally boarded up here. But the PADC developed a plan and square guidelines to carefully restructure the avenue into a place that would balance the needs of both the nation and the city. Commemorative sites were established alongside high-density office, federal, and residential buildings. And today, the success of the avenue and the surrounding neighborhoods, it's really the direct result of that PADC plan. The corporation, though, was dissolved in 1996, and responsibilities to continue enforcing that plan and maintain the avenue were given to the National Park Service, General Services Administration, and NCPC. And the road itself is under the jurisdiction of DDOT. Over the 2 decades that the corporation was in existence, it leveraged $150 million in public funds to generate $1.5 billion in private development along the avenue. It's a pretty big success. But the plan was developed 40 years ago, and it really doesn't reflect another number of existing conditions that have changed along the avenue. First and foremost, there's no longer a PADC. So we now have multiple federal and local jurisdictions, a bid as well, and private landholders that are operating and maintaining the avenue. And without one single voice advocating for and guiding investments and upkeep of the avenue, maintaining it at a level consistent with that of PADC times has been pretty challenging. Thirdly, DC, just like many other American cities, has experienced a sort of a renaissance downtown over the past 10 years. So we have other areas like Center City, as you see up here, K Street. They've really become the address to have. So in other words, Pennsylvania Avenue has some competition these days. So given these issues, NCPC, GSA, NPS, and the district have determined that now is the time to act. We've guided and invited agencies with jurisdiction along the avenue to form a steering committee that guides the solutions to many of these challenges. We want them to develop a work plan to implement improvements along the avenue. And most importantly, we need to determine what the function and role of the avenue is in our 21st century capital city. So the idea of the initiative began a few years ago as NPS began work on their environmental assessment, which is now a management plan for the avenue. And it was clear that the challenges that were along the avenue really reached beyond the responsibilities of NPS. So we had to extend the conversation to NCPC, GSA, the city, others that all recognize the need to establish kind of a collaborative effort to discuss and solve these issues. So we've set up 2 levels of agency input. Top level is a steering committee, and its purpose is really to provide guidance and input on the key decisions that we have to make along the way. Below that, we have 4 working groups. They will be staffed by all the agencies, and they focus on the topic areas listed here. They will lead really the development and implementation of that work plan for the initiative. And there will likely be times that those groups need to work together to solve and untangle many of the problems on the avenue. So we have 3 main purposes for the avenue and the initiative itself. The steering committee is really going to address near-term needs, develop a long-term vision for the avenue and its relationship to the surrounding neighborhoods, and really identify a framework to govern this moving forward. And we anticipate that the initiative will answer a lot of questions that are out there today. They include, how can the avenue bridge the national and local needs? How can the economic vitality of the avenue be improved? And how can the avenue be a more engaging place on a day-to-day basis? So the agencies responsible for the avenue recognize that there are some key issues that we must collectively address. So we've begun to break them down into those 4 working group topics that you saw on an earlier slide. And there's certainly a bit of overlap there. The first issue, though, deals with operations and maintenance. The infrastructure and furnishings along the avenue are aging. So much of the streetscape elements are at the end of their life cycle, and the replacements are no longer available, just as an example, the pavers. The second issue deals with governance. The jurisdictional boundaries here are very complicated, and this map only identifies 4 of them. The red dotted line is the PADC boundary. The solid blue line is the historic site district. The darker blue shaded area is the responsibility of NPS. That's what they maintain and operate. And the dotted white line is the roadway that DDOT is responsible for maintaining. So if you add another layer to this, agencies like the National Gallery of Art and Archives maintain outdoor space. So do other places like the Canadian Embassy and the museum. So you have multiple jurisdictions here working together to maintain one avenue, and a lot of times it gets very complicated. Third issue deals with animation along the street, or programming, or street life activation. Events are really on the rise, which is fantastic, but the process to approve them and implement them is really convoluted. So on weekends, a lot of times during the nicer months, you'll see Pennsylvania Avenue very well activated. We have fundraisers, cultural events, demonstrations, you name it, it's out there, which is great. And permitting for commercial activities like cafes, they're also on the rise too. But the policies that are guiding the permitting and implementation of those activities, it's downright confusing. We have an overlap of local and national agencies, discrepancies between policies, and those really need to be resolved. Last but not least, there are planning and design issues. As I mentioned earlier, the PADC plan was developed 40 years ago, which it made incredibly positive changes to the avenue. But the plan itself hasn't really been revisited in decades. So how do we ensure security for federal facilities is effective while also providing benefits to the public realm? The plan doesn't really talk about that. It also doesn't talk about how to incorporate sustainable design practices into the landscape. There are now more downtown residents, which is fantastic. How do we better accommodate their needs? And last but not least, how do we solidify that economic vitality of the avenue for the next 20 years? And honestly, that's what it comes down to, is the economic vitality. The Trust for Public Land released a study in 2009 documenting the benefits a park brings to nearby property values. And they found that if a park is well maintained, it can increase those values from 5 to 15%, depending upon the quality. It's also important to note, though, that the value of the property can decrease if the park is not properly maintained. So there are many other benefits to well-functioning public realms: personal health, tourism earnings, sustainable and stormwater management practices. But the basic takeaway here is this: when the public realm is well maintained, when it's lively and safe and active, the adjacent building owners really benefit from that increased property value. And the city benefits too, with greater tax benefits and tax revenue. That can be reinvested back into that park, and so you increase the activity and the maintenance, and it's just it's a good cycle to be in. So what's at risk if we don't look at these issues holistically? Well, if the avenue is not maintained and improved to higher standards, there is a risk of loss in economic strength. And today we really need a competitive avenue that benefits the city and the nation. So today the avenue is at a transition point. There is some serious competition in the city these days, as I mentioned earlier. Hotspots have moved to places like NOMA and City Center. And there are 13 Class A office buildings along Penn Avenue today. They're currently being leased at a rate at about $671 a square foot. Compare that with the downtown bid area, which is generally Massachusetts Avenue to the north, Pennsylvania Avenue to the south, 15th and 16th Street on the west, and Union Station on the east. So that area generally averages about $755 a square foot. So it's a little bit of a difference there. Take another stat. 39% of that office space is leased by law firms, and 4 of them will be moving soon. So right now, the vacancy rate for the avenue is 11.6%, which is below the average for the bid, a little bit above the average for the city at 10.8%. But if those 4 firms leave and new tenants aren't found, the vacancy rate could go as high as 21.8%. So I don't think anyone wants to see that. Now, there are many positive changes happening along the avenue, too. The old post office, you all are very familiar with, a $200 million redevelopment project into a luxury hotel and conference center. FBI may be relocating, which would open up the possibility to redevelop the existing headquarters site. 1301 East Street, a private site, is going to be redeveloped into an investment of about $100 million into that building. National Theater will have new programming and operational improvements. And Pershing Park, there's legislation in Congress now to make this the official National World War I Memorial. So there may be opportunities for improvements at that park too. So we're at the very beginning now of a multi-year effort. And we plan to use a three-phase approach for this initiative. Right now, we're in phase one, which is essentially the scoping. We're developing a work plan for the effort. It's going to include near and long-term elements. And the steering committee met in May and are meeting again tomorrow to provide input to develop that work plan. A draft will be presented at the steering committee meeting in September for discussion. And we'll also have an aspiration statement that will guide the initiative's long-term vision. So we plan to return to the Commission later this year with an update on these items. The next phase will begin to tackle near-term needs along the avenue, and phase three will really focus more on our long-term actions. So the steering committee's decisions to articulate the role and function of the avenue, it won't just be a conversation between local and federal agencies. We recognize the need to have a robust public outreach and focus group effort, and that's what we're building right now. We want to reach residents, tourists, the business community, and many others, and we anticipate this to be an ongoing conversation that will grow along with the initiative's efforts. So right now our project website is up and running. We plan to use this to engage in interactive online discussions and find out more ways that we can improve the avenue and track progress. So we anticipate that to be a two-way street for information. We also plan to host a public workshop on July 23rd from 6 to 8 p.m. right here at NCPC. It's going to be an open house format. We'll have a brief presentation similar to what I gave today. And during the workshop, we'd like to hear ideas on the challenges and opportunities that exist along the avenue, as well as kind of some key ideas that that the public thinks should be included in the initiative's aspiration statement. We're also beginning to coordinate focus group meetings with stakeholders. Topics include tourism and culture, transportation, civic needs, commercial business. We anticipate that these discussions will grow and shift over time as the initiative moves forward. Last but not least, we're developing an exciting speaker series event the morning of September 19th at the museum. So we'll have a diverse panel of national and local historians, civic leaders, design critics. They'll all be here to explore how the most symbolic street in America can continue to evolve along with local and national needs. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation on the initiative. At this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions.